trust you, for I will dwell under your shadow. I will not dread the terror by night, for angels are all around me. Oh, I will not fear. We are so blessed in this church to have this musical talent of all of these incredible artists, people who give their hearts and soul and believe what they are singing. It is so beautiful. My refuge and my trust, the song says. Because, before we understand that God holds us, that we do not need to act out of that fear, that God is our refuge, it is our parents who fill that role for us. That is where we learn to trust life. But before we learn to trust God and to trust life and not be afraid of that terror by night, we put everyone and everything in God's shoes but God. Everyone and everything in God's shoes but God. There is a reason why idolatry is at the top of the thou shalt not list. Because it causes much grief in our life when we put other things in the shoes of God. It's like Cinderella's little glass slipper we try and cram and shove into that role of God, our parents and then our friends and then maybe our spouses and maybe even the church sometimes and maybe even ourselves. Even though that shoe doesn't even come close to fitting, no matter how hard you want it to. And we may, in fact, be surrounded by angels, but those angels are not God either. People may be the hands and the feet and the eyes of God, but they are only a piece of God in our lives. They are not the whole. But see, when we place others in the shoes of God, we have a problem. And so we have to find ways to learn, find ways to remember, to be reminded that people, although gifted sometimes with a magic mirror that shows us the reflection of God, they are not it. I have seen this mistake in the eyes of children sometimes where I am seen in the shoes of God. Last Sunday at Easter, our 3-year-old daughter was struggling with this a bit. I got up early before the sun rose and spread Easter eggs and hard-boiled eggs all over the yard. I put a stuffed animal by the door so that when she got up, there were a few goodies there, candy and treats. And so she got up and went to the door, and when she saw that stuff by the door, she was so excited. Her eyes were huge. Her eyebrows went up and almost touched her hairline. She took in a huge breath, and her hands moved up to her mouth, her chin nearly hitting her chest. Her mouth was open so wide, and she said, "Oh my goodness, the Easter Bunny came for me." It was this glorious moment, this beautiful moment that I feel horribly guilty about. See, I don't want to lie to her. As we gathered eggs that morning, I could see her mind start working. "Mama T," she said, These are the eggs we dyed yesterday. They are, I said. Mama T, the soft duck that the Easter Bunny brought me is like the duck that I liked at the store, that one that was on the shelf that we saw the other day. It is, I said. I do not want to lie to this child. I watch what I say to her. I will not lie directly to her about this, but when she asks me pointedly, I will tell her. I don't bring up the bunny conversation. Her school and friends and the television do plenty of that, so I don't even have to. And there's this peer pressure to participate. Even though I'm delighting in the magic of it all, it still makes me feel so guilty. But there's this peer pressure to participate. How would she feel if the Easter Bunny came to the house of all of her school friends and not hers? But I don't feel good about not telling her either. I want her to trust us, and I want to trust her. I want her to trust life. I want her to trust God. And when we hide the truth with the purpose of misleading, I'm still lying to her in a way. But with children, just like adults, trust must be earned. As for our daughter, it's important that we create a relationship that's based in some kind of mutual trust, because the stakes get higher and higher as she gets older. And it's our job to guide her until she can clearly find her own voice and sort out her own voice from all the messages that she hears. But in the meantime, we have to be her conscience until she develops an understanding about the world that we live in, even though we're actually influencing her experience of that world at the same time. You know, it seems to me that the Easter Bunny story creates this opportunity for us to lie to our children in a not too harmful way, so that later on, when they can handle it, we have a story to use to show them how we are not, in fact, God, but we are fallible too. In the spring, a big bunny brings Easter eggs and chocolates to the home of little children while they're sleeping. But did I mention that for some families, it's only to good children? Because we might as well get some use out of this story for a while if we're going to lie to them. That's the tempting part, right? To wield that temporary power of I know something you don't know, to control them while we can. You know, I really try not to do that because it was done to me, and I can see how it translated later to some stories that I told myself about the way the world works and about the way God is. But I hear parents in the store say, the Easter Bunny doesn't bring chocolate to little girls who act like that. Oof, gets on my last nerve. I don't know if you've heard this newest one at Christmas time. Have you heard this elf? They have this ultimate in parental power. It's an elf. And now Santa doesn't just know when you've been naughty or nice. This little elf actually gets moved around the house every night to a different location. Every single night to keep track between, probably for the month before Christmas. But to me, that would be a little bit too hard to undo later. Now, if they know and we both are in on it, then it's fine. But when one of them doesn't know, something doesn't feel right to me. To me, it would be way too hard to undo later. If I'm God to her, even for a little while, I want to wield that power as responsibly as I can. Now, sometimes this little game ends with the child feeling like they've been betrayed by the adults who they trusted. And sometimes the child comes away grateful to have had this magic in their childhood that they can connect to later on in life. Because see, if both parties know, then it isn't a lie anymore. But if there's one party who knows and the other does not, it leaks its way into other areas of our lives. There's this unspoken understanding that we're both playing this magical game together if we both know. The difference, I believe, is whether we use our power effectively. That's what will tell us whether or not they turn out angry or grateful. Whether or not we take the opportunity to unpack that cultural myth to talk about the whether and the why that we as their parents have lied, when they actually have the capacity to understand it. How they respond, I believe, depends on whether we continue to lie to them when they ask us directly. If we use it as an opportunity to build trust, then I believe it can turn out for the good. Somebody told me in the line on the way out that that moment happened with a grandmother and a 5-year-old daughter this Easter, and she said, I was in that moment, I was putting her to bed before Easter, and she turned and looked at me and said, "Are you the Easter bunny?" And Grandma said, "Yes." And she said, "How are you going to get to all the houses before tomorrow?" I have heard this dilemma of whether or not to lie from so many parents in this congregation over the years. It doesn't really matter what you or your family wants, because the myth will make its way into your home, either because it is talked about there or because it isn't talked about there. I've wanted so badly to tell her the truth, to not have to even participate in this little game that's nearly forced on us, but I have not yet found a way. But the flip side of that, telling the truth the whole time, all the time, can be spiteful and even cruel, especially to a child who doesn't yet have cognitive development to be able to hold that kind of ambiguity. See, children have a difficult time spotting a lie or even tracking a narrative where a character obviously shows bad intentions. When I asked Beckett, who's 3, if the prince in Frozen was telling the truth when he claims that the princess was dead, when just seconds earlier she was shown alive, Beckett said that he was. Why would he lie? He's a prince. He did look sad and remorseful, but he certainly was not telling the truth. And so I don't think it's her memory or her capacity to tell a story. She simply can't imagine a world where she would be lied to. Children do not understand intent or motivation until around the ages of about 6 to 8. And they can't even make room for a misunderstanding. So Beckett's first attempt at grasping lying was very linear and literal. She said, "You lied, Mama T. You told me you were picking me up, and Papa did." So it didn't really matter if I was mistaken or if the circumstances changed. In her mind, I lied to her. Now, I know adults who still have this linear understanding of truth and lies in their relationships as well, and it doesn't make very much room for fallibility or grace. So we could probably all stand to budge a little there. But as we come of age, like our 9th graders will be doing next week, we come to learn that there are chapters in our lives that do not have happy endings. We're given more responsibility and more accountability in our lives in a new way. We have more and more privacy given to us and more opportunities to fail with much higher stakes. We learn that people manipulate and lie and steal and torture and kill and are negligent, and that we hold that power as well. Now, we hope that our young adults learn a moral context that moves beyond just simply the good and the bad being only about punishment and reward, about what's in it for them, to being in relationship with others who may have very different wants and needs than they do. But the question remains, how do we teach our children that they will be lied to by adults, by the media, by their friends, even by strangers, and at the same time teach them that trust and love and truth are worth the risk? Encourage them to tell the truth when they know they're being lied to. Help them discover in the midst of all of this that vulnerability is in fact strength. How do we teach telling the truth in a way that is compassionate, truth in love, when people lie and when we have lied to them? Now, in a study conducted by the University of Massachusetts researcher Robert Feldman, he demonstrates how reflexive the act of lying actually is for so many people. In this study, he and his team of researchers asked 2 strangers to talk to each other for 10 minutes. And the conversations were recorded, and then each subject was asked to review the tape again. Before looking at the footage, the subjects actually told the researchers that they'd been completely and totally honest and accurate in their statements. But once they rolled the tape back, the subjects were amazed to discover all the little lies that came out in just 10 minutes. According to Feldman, 60% of the subjects lied at least once during the short conversation. And in that span of time, subjects told an average of 2.92 false things. Now, I don't know what a 0.02 false thing looks like, but 3 lies every 10 minutes is a lot. So out of 16 waking hours a day, that makes a lot of opportunities to lie. Teaching our children about the lying in the world begins, though, with understanding why we lie, because they are watching. So according to psychologist and credibility expert Paul Eckman, there are lots of reasons why we lie, but mostly we lie out of convenience, he believes. It seems easier in the moment to lie than to tell the truth about not wanting to go to a party or to the salesman at the front door. You know what? I just bought a new vacuum cleaner. Sorry, thanks. We demonstrate these little white lies to our children all the time. Be polite, we say. Tell them you like the gift or the food. Don't tell the host that you're bored and ready to leave. Lies seem to be some kind of social lubricant. Developmentally, though, interestingly, lying is a cognitive signal that you understand or can anticipate what others are thinking. So it parallels, actually, the development of empathy. Now, maybe I'm just getting less polite as I get older, or I just don't care, but I don't want you to tell me that you like my meatloaf if you don't like my meatloaf. Because I might make it for you every time you come over. Because I'm thoughtful like that. Paying attention. I might give you more of what you don't want. But there's some social rules that we need to teach our children that involve impulse control. In order to be effective in relationships and in the world, we have to learn when and how to speak our truth. But when children are young, they don't understand the larger benefits of politeness or the social responsibility of attending someone's party or gathering in the longer arc of friendship. They don't have the tools to find the truth that they can say or the skill of how to say something tough in a way that can be heard. So if we never learned how to withhold all we were thinking or feeling at any given time, it would drastically limit our choices and our relationships. And as we get older, too, our emotional landscape broadens, and we begin to recognize that feelings are both fleeting and complex. The way I feel in a particular instant may not, in fact, encompass how I feel about an entire event. And so my truth actually depends a lot on my own self-awareness and what my values and goals are. And all of this leads to that uncomfortable question that most of us struggle with at some time or another. Would you rather be right or effective? Now, unfortunately, in teaching impulse control, we also teach holding our own feelings inside to the point of not knowing which feelings are in fact our own. Layered in shoulds and oughts, our true voice can become difficult to hear. So we have to encourage knowing who we are and how to use who we are effectively to live out our values and work towards those goals. But why do we lie even when we have a conviction that we will not do so? The Bible gives us a lovely example with my favorite character. If you've been listening to me, you know who that is. Peter, who puts on his clothes to swim to Jesus. Peter, who can't stay awake. Peter. Peter is the church, and he is us, fallible and messy, trying to cover up all of our flaws, even at the foot of the truth. He can't stay awake to what's happening around him. Peter. So at the Last Supper, Jesus tells Peter that he would deny and disown Jesus, and Peter replied, "Even if all fall away on the account of you, I never will." Ooh, you have to watch those nevers. They always lead to trouble. Jesus answered, "I tell you the truth, this very night before the rooster crows, you will disown me 3 times. And Peter says, "Even if I have to die with you, I will never disown you." And all the other disciples said the same. And later that night, Jesus was arrested. The first denial was to a servant girl in Luke. They seized him and led him away, bringing him to the high priest's house. Peter followed at a distance, and when they'd kindled the fire in the middle of the courtyard and sat down together, Peter sat down with them. A servant girl saw him seated there in the firelight. She looked closely at him and said, "This man was with him." But he said, "Woman, I don't know him." And then a second denial to the same girl in Mark. When the servant girl saw him again there, she said again to those standing around, "This fellow is one of them." And again, he denies it. And then the third denial to a number of people is emphatic because he's getting angry. He's got to believe it himself, right? He gets angrier as he curses, according to Matthew. After a little while, those standing there went up to Peter and said, "Surely you are one of them, for your accent gives you away." Then he began to call down curses on himself and swore to them, "I don't know the man," he says emphatically. And then the rooster crowed. And Peter remembered the word that Jesus had spoken before the rooster crows, "You will disown me 3 times." And he went outside and he wept bitterly. Peter, 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 Peter. Dr. Eckman says that one of the main reasons we are motivated to lie, besides convenience, is to protect ourselves or protect another. Now, this can be quite practical, protecting ourselves from punishment or from physical threat, but it can also be lying to protect ourselves from some perceived threat, like our ego or our image. If you want someone to tell you the truth, you have to create a safe space so that they do not feel threatened. You have to seek the motivation behind whatever behavior it was that they did. Suspend your judgment for just a moment and seek to understand the value behind that particular choice. Maybe even assuming sane and well-intended until the last minute. Investigators do this all the time, joining with the person by identifying what kind of key value drove their action so that they admit that they did it instead of actually lying about it. We so desperately want to be seen and understood, motivations and all. But our need to protect comes from fear. Fear that we will lose something, an opportunity, a friendship, a relationship, our privacy, even our life, feeling like we might be obliterated if they knew that we'd lied. Peter was trying to save himself, but sometimes the truth is even worth the risk. Dr. Eckman says another reason why we frequently lie is to make ourselves appear more valuable or to increase our status, which seems harmless on the surface, but can actually be the symptom of a deeper unmet need. This includes all of that boasting and bragging and embellishing and fibbing and preaching and pulpits and, we're all good storytellers, aren't we? But it happens in job interviews and in new relationships. That fish that got away gets bigger and bigger. We are storytelling creatures made in the image of God. We too have the power to create, and the Bible's creation story is in one sense filled with lies. Think about that garden for a minute. Who's lying to whom? But see, I want our daughter to have an active and creative imagination, but not to overuse that skill or use it inappropriately. Because when you do overuse it, it's a cry for help. If a child says that he hit a home run at the baseball game and you know that that wasn't true, it's a cry for help. It can be about insecurity, his need to be accepted by the group who's listening. What he might want or need is more batting practice, maybe. So instead of correcting him on the spot, an obvious path to humiliation, which can feel like death sometimes, consider a private conversation that talks about the motivation behind the lie and encourage him to go back to those whom he lied to about his insecurity and to come clean. But as for adults, pay attention to where you stray from the truth, even just in hyperbole. It will likely direct you to some internal work that could help you better understand your own motivations. Because we don't only lie about ourselves, we lie about other people. Speaking untruths about others is a cry, again, for social status. It functions at this level of seemingly creating an enemy in order to gain acceptance with another group. There's a parable from an Italian priest in the 1500s named Philippe Neri that says, a woman went to a priest and said confession that she'd spoken badly about some people in town. She was asking for penance and wanted forgiveness, and the priest told her, go and get a chicken and pluck the feathers of this chicken and walk about the town and throw them around. This is your penance. So she did as she was told, and then returned to the priest, and he went to her and said, now go and retrieve all the feathers. And she said, I cannot. They're spread out and thrown over the whole town. And he said, yes, just like your words. Remember, what you throw out, you cannot get back. And lastly, Eckman says we lie in order to demonstrate our own power over an authority and to get what we want. Eckman claims that a successful lie establishes a child's power, both to the child and even sometimes to the parent who suspects that the child has lied, but they can't prove it. In younger children, this comes out in teasing or tricking and then becomes a test of a parent's omniscience. But for a teenager who's trying to differentiate from his or her own parents, each successful lie is a step towards autonomy. But when they know that we care more about the relationship and their safety than the lie of the moment, that we care more about the impact of a breach of trust than the crime at hand, we can earn their respect and they ours. You know, it's interesting. Science has also proven that it's harder to lie to someone whose values you share, and it's harder to lie to someone whom you respect. So think about those to whom you lie and ask yourself whether or not you truly respect them. So we've looked at why we lie, because it's easy in order to protect ourselves or others, to increase our worth or status, and to demonstrate our power. But how good are we at telling when people are lying to us? Given the earlier statistic of lying nearly 3 times every 10 minutes, you probably have had a lot more opportunities to practice than you thought you did before you came here today. And this sermon is about 20 minutes long, so that would be a few as well. But research shows that we're actually pretty terrible at deception detection. Most people can figure out we're being lied to only about 54% of the time, which is nearly no better than flipping a coin, no matter how well you know the person. But there's a proven method of improving your rate of detecting lies to nearly 94%, which would come in handy for a lot of reasons, but especially if you're the parent of a soon-to-be preteen or teenager, or an HR professional, or a lawyer, or a poker player, or maybe you just want to know. But Dr. Eckman was highly motivated himself to figure out a scientific way to prove that people were lying. You see, we need to all understand our own culture, and Eckman understood his own by doing a little poking around. He had 2 stories that motivated him about lying to do his research. One is from his childhood. When he was a teen, he was cheated on by a girl who he caught with the other boy at the movies. And then later, the girl lied and told her mother that young Eckman had called her a terrible name that I won't repeat from the pulpit. And then that girl's mother told his mother, and he was punished for something that he did not do. And his mom didn't believe him. A second peek into Eckman's culture of lying came from his work as a therapist. Early in his career, he met with someone who was suicidal, who was up for release, and he asked her point blank whether or not she was safe to go home, whether or not she would leave and make another attempt. And she said it was safe. And he let her go, only to discover that later she had killed herself. Now, Eckman had the interview on tape, and he watched it over and over again, trying to see what he could have possibly missed. And then he spent his entire career focused on mapping the face, identifying all of the muscles, both voluntary and involuntary, that move with certain emotions. And he discovered cross-cultural micro-expressions, these involuntary flashes of emotion that go across the face in 1/25th of a second in high-stakes situations, when something is to be lost or gained. Now, I've taken this training, so be careful coming through the line. But seeing the incongruence is one thing. What you do with what you see is another skill entirely. But the question that I ask is, why are we so naturally bad at it? Why do we have to work so hard to be able to tell if someone is lying to us? If evolutionarily lying is so important to our very survival, wouldn't knowing when we're being lied to also be important? Now, I believe the answer may in fact be developmental. Our capacity to be moral and our capacity to understand complex motivations is developmental, and that means that different stages require different information, much like our capacity to develop cultural competency to include increasingly more complexity of difference. That's developmental as well. Or even the development of a moral compass to include more and more people under your umbrella of concern. Your capacity to speak the truth in a way that is palatable is developmental. The capacity to gauge how much needs to be shared in any given moment. It develops over time and over experience. But we need to identify our own culture of lying. What is it in our history that has shaped our understanding about when it's okay to lie and what it feels like to be lied to? We need to understand our own motivations and our own lenses, the culture for us around lying and trust. And when we examine these stories that we carry around with us about when and whether we've been lied to and how it affects our present, we can increase our capacity to make space for an expanding truth that carries with it complex emotions and values that are subject to content and to circumstance. But see, our core beliefs about the world of which we're a part impact our decisions around trust and truth and deception. So if you believe that this world is merely survival of the fittest, then lies are merely another means to an end. And lying and being lied to is just another part of life. But if you don't believe that, then you're going to need some help. You're going to need a place to come. A place where you can foster a sense of trust in the world, where you can seek the truth in love with people together. Because see, we gather in this place to remind ourselves that there is a larger arc of the human story, a religious story of which we are a part, that values love over fear, that lifts up compassion. We gather to remember the beauty in the world and to remind ourselves to stay awake to the pain and the suffering in this world and to do something about it when we can. We gather as heretics, in a sense, to choose for ourselves whether the values of this culture need to be our own. We gather to witness freedoms unfolding in the midst of a diverse family that holds us accountable. And that takes us back to the Easter Bunny. What speaks louder to our children than what we tell them to do is what we do ourselves. If you take the story of the Easter Bunny or the Tooth Fairy literally in that one small moment, that small story of that very instant, the fact is that we are lying to our children. But there's a bigger arc of the story that is about our relationship to our children and our relationship to God and to the world. A spirit of unseen gift-giving and abundance. A message that sometimes we tell partial truths in defense of a greater goal. You see, one day they too will be called to do the work of bringing their children into a larger human story. A human story that's full of truth and lies, of beauty and suffering, a story filled with drama and metaphor. And they will have to decide for themselves whether or not they want to play the games of our culture or not, and what the consequences will be. I choose to play the game. Not because of the game itself, but because of the opportunity for a connection with the players and the fodder for conversation about what matters in this life to me and to them. So spend time this week watching your own lies that we all tell, and see where it points. See if maybe those lies in fact reveal a greater truth that you might pursue. And pray for one another, that our motivations and our intentions, our words and our actions be for a greater good. Amen.